good. I think we have a great case was put on.
This kind of rhetoric is unsurprising coming from the former president, and it is appalling. And we got to tell him who we are.
I do consider this indictment a complete embarrassment to the American legal system.
Hello, I'm Nancy Cordes in Washington, and welcome to America Decides. From New York to Arizona today, former President Trump and his allies appeared in a variety of courtrooms. In Lower Manhattan, the defense in Trump's criminal hush money trial wrapped up its case without the former president taking the stand. Closing arguments are set for next week.
Very good. I think we have a great case was put on. There is no crime.
Meanwhile, about a dozen people accused of attempting to overturn former President Trump's defeat in Arizona in 2020 are being arraigned in Phoenix today. In total, there are 18 defendants, including former New York City mayor and Trump attorney Rudy Giuliani. Major Garrett and Ed O'Keefe join us now to talk about all of this. Major, let's start with you.
Yep.
Good to have you here. So you've had an eye on this trial in Lower Manhattan for a few weeks now. The prosecution brought forth about 20 witnesses. The defense brought forth 2. What do you make of where things stand right now?
Trump teased, as he often does, things he won't ultimately do, didn't testify because his attorneys knew that would put him in a very compromised position, having to answer questions about all of his conduct, much of which has been established. Whether or not a jury agrees that's a crime, specifically a felony, we don't know. But the forensic evidence, the paper trail has been fairly well established. Not only that, the checks and the false filing of documents about the Stormy Daniels payoff, but the idea of National Enquirer catching and killing stories for the political benefit of one individual, Donald Trump. All that's been fairly established. Will the jury think that this is so egregious, conduct so terrible, that the only remedy is to convict a former president and send that former president to jail? I think that's always, Nancy, been an incredibly high bar for any set of Americans, even as the president maligns New Yorkers who he thinks are inclined to indict him and then convict him just because. I don't think that's true. I think it's a high bar, and I'm not saying it's going to happen or not going to happen, but even with an evidentiary case as solid as the one the prosecutors have laid before the jury, it's very much an open question.
The case could go to the jury as soon as next week. Ed, in Arizona, where you are right now, former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani pleaded not guilty to charges related to this alleged fake elector scheme. So what exactly are prosecutors alleging happened here?
They are alleging that these 18 people essentially conspired, forged, and fraudulently attempted to do so, or committed fraud by trying to overturn the results of Arizona's elections and tried to tip their 11 electoral votes away from Joe Biden, who won here by a little more than 10,000 votes, over to Donald Trump. This is similar to what we've seen in 4 other states, Georgia and Michigan most notably. The former president himself not among those charged, though he is named in the 58-page indictment as an unindicted co-conspirator and someone who was in essence directing traffic. Notably, you've got the former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, the former Trump attorney John Eastman, who was the one pushing this theory most of all, Christina Bobb, who is still currently the RNC's head of election issues or voting issues. And then Kelly Ward, the state party chairwoman, former state party chairwoman, and her husband. But most notably, and the one we were all waiting for today, was the former mayor, who phoned it in, as did a handful of other defendants, seemingly saying, look, I was only subpoenaed last Friday night, didn't have a chance to get an attorney quite yet, think this is all part of the ongoing attempt to discredit Donald Trump, and in essence was trying to discredit the process by making a mockery of it in his virtual appearance. Prosecutors said, though, look, we've been trying since late April when he was first indicted to serve him his subpoena. We went to his house in his office in New York. They wouldn't let us in. They finally found him outside and after his birthday party in Florida last Friday night, where he was finally served. And he was instructed today, you've got to pay a $10,000 bond. You've got 30 days to show up here in Arizona to be processed in person by the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. And we'll see you in court over the course of the summer into October, when this trial is now set to begin.
Rudy Giuliani served on his 80th birthday. Major, you've been covering efforts to overturn the 2020 election since 2020. So where does this case in Arizona fall in the pantheon of cases that have to do with this seismic 2020 event? And how does it compare, say, to similar cases in states like Michigan?
It's a very clean case. It's about forgery, conspiracy, and trying to overturn a process in Arizona. And yes, we use the word allege because that's what prosecutors do. They allege. But there's no dispute that fake electors were created, that lawsuits were filed to contest the election. They were thrown out or lost. And the defendants in this case refused to accept the results. Arizona certified electoral votes exactly according to Arizona law. And these defendants ignored Arizona law. They ignored court rulings, and they manufactured fraudulent slates of electors to confuse the system in order to overturn Arizona's certified presidential results and in hopes of overturning the entire presidential election. That's the allegation. It's very clear. And it's a clean case that will bring all of these questionable actions to light in this current election year. Was Arizona's election certified? Yes. Did every subsequent recount prove it? Yes. As a matter of fact, one sponsored by advocates for the former president, the so-called cyber ninjas, when they counted all the votes, you know what they found? Biden should have got 308 more votes than he got on the official registration in Arizona. So everything that was attempted in this case tried to subvert Arizona law. And what Arizona is doing is prosecuting its law to preserve it.
Right.
Not Donald Trump. It's to preserve Arizona's law. So every future election can be conducted under the rules and properly. That's what this case is about.
Send the message, don't try this again. I want to ask you about something else that got a lot of headlines, which is a video that was posted on Donald Trump's social media account, which included printed references to a, quote, unified Reich, a word obviously associated with Nazi Germany now. The video has since been taken down. The Trump team says it was posted by a junior staffer who didn't know, didn't see the reference. But, things like this have happened before. This is not happening in a vacuum.
It is not happening in a vacuum, Nancy. And you cannot put this in the category of coincidence. There is rhetoric that the former president reads off a teleprompter that is rooted in the rhetoric of the Third Reich, of Nazi Germany. This is a reference to the First Reich, the 1890 Germany. Was anyone in America, Nancy, pining to be Germany in 1890? No, we were trying to be Americans, doing American things. Any reference along these lines is so coincidentally or non-coincidentally related to something that is sulfurous in American politics, that has a distinctly negative, murderous history. And Trump loves to play in that space for one reason and one reason only. It antagonizes the left, terrifies the left, and inspires some of his supporters. The one great thing that Trump misses in that is that potential swing voters look at this probably more aghast than anything else. And he's playing with fire and always has been.
You talked about the fact that he has a history of comments like this. Let's listen to some of those comments right now.
When they let, I think the real number is 15, 16 million people into our country, when they do that, we got a lot of work to do. They're poisoning the blood of our country. That's what they've done. We pledge to you that we will root out the communists, Marxists, fascists, and the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country.
So, Major, the question for you and for Ed in Arizona is, how does this fit into the case that the Biden campaign has been trying to put front and center, which is that this is a fight for democracy itself?
Right. And one of the things that happens in this conversation is, oh, the Biden campaign doesn't like it, so now it becomes partisan. Look, just as an American, are you comfortable with a former president of the United States using rhetoric that can be drawn on a straight line to the Third Reich in Germany? Yes or no? Forget what Biden says about it. Forget what his campaign surrogates say about it. Is that a threshold question for you as an American in 2024? Yes or no? That's it. And that's part of this election. It's not the entire part of this election, but I don't think it needs a lot of pushing or prodding. What the Biden campaign fears is if they don't push it, we won't see it. Hey, we saw it.
Yeah.
Everyone sees it. And lots of people will come to their own conclusions about it.
Ed, this is Mana to the Biden campaign.
Look, the timing on this, it couldn't be better, because as the trial wraps up and the former president sort of steps out of the controlled environment of a gag-ordered courtroom, the hope or the expectation, perhaps, among Democrats in the president's reelection campaign is that more of this is going to happen. And it will begin to remind those that maybe are steering off in the direction of supporting the former president, oh, yeah, he has done and said a lot of this stuff over the last several years. This is why we didn't reelect him. This is why we shouldn't reelect him again. So the fact that the White House, the Biden campaign itself, the vice president, the second gentleman, all jumped on this as quickly as they did in the last 24 hours is a sign that they will continue to do so in order to once again sow doubts and concern and opposition to him in the minds of voters across the country, A, who may have been thinking about supporting him, or B, were thinking of sitting home and avoiding engagement in this election. The Biden campaign trying to say you have to. So we'll see. But certainly the swift reaction is a sign of things to come.
And to your point, Ed, a short time ago, the president, speaking at a fundraiser in Boston, said that Donald Trump uses Hitler's language, not America's. Major Garrett here in Washington, Ed O'Keefe in Arizona. Thank you both so much. A defiant Capitol riot defendant. Why an Illinois man charged for his alleged role in the January 6th insurrection says he'll soon be cleared of all charges. Our Scott MacFarlane is standing by here with us on set. He'll have more on this brazen prediction. You're streaming America Decides. Hi, Scott.
But if you're with us, they put you in jail. Look at what's happened with the J6 hostages. The hostages, that's a horrible thing.
That was former President Trump, of course, defending Capitol rioters during a campaign speech on the third anniversary of the insurrection. Well, fast forward to this week, and perhaps emboldened by those words, a high-level January 6th defendant predicted that the former president will win in November and then clear him of the charges he's now facing. Our Scott MacFarlane joins us now to talk about this. He's been reporting on this story for CBS News. Scott, it's good to see you.
Same here. This is a different moment, Nancy. We've heard all kinds of rhetoric from all kinds of people involved with January 6th, political and defendants. This is different. This is the most explicit reference any defendants made in open court or otherwise to the predicted pardons that are going to potentially blanket pardon 1,400 January 6th defendants. His name is John Benuelos. He's from Illinois. He's the singular defendant from January 6th who's accused of pulling out a gun and firing the gun while amid the mob outside the Capitol. A unique case.
At who?
At the Capitol itself, or into the sky.
Okay.
Not at a person, didn't hit anybody, but this is a different level charge than anybody else has faced, different type of charge than anybody else has faced. And potentially for that reason, he's in pretrial detention right now. Appearing at his arraignment yesterday, the judge urged him to find a good defense lawyer and watch what he says. John Benuelos said in so many words, the quiet part out loud, I don't have to worry, Trump's coming back to office. It does parallel an escalation in the rhetoric being used in that space, in the January 6th criminal world, as this election gets closer and as Trump's rhetoric escalates too.
You cover these cases so closely. Have you heard that kind of sentiment from other defendants? Because it wouldn't be surprising. Former President Trump has said many times he'd be open to pardoning these individuals, and he calls them hostages, not convicts.
It's always equivocating, or it's more subtle. There have been January 6th defendants who, when asked, said, yes, I'll ask for a pardon, or I hope for a pardon. This feels like a transition moment where now they're speaking explicitly and brazenly about what they expect will happen. And that, to a degree, becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You have more defendants expecting this is going to be their fate, and you have Donald Trump not yet delineating or differentiating to whom he may grant pardons or commutations. Right now, it's just they're all hostages. It's everybody. And it's quite a broad brush with which to paint defendants from January 6th, because there's quite a diversity of people, Nancy. Right. There are some who truly did walk in, walk out, saw the chaos and decided this is not for me. They were unlawfully on the grounds. They face a misdemeanor. There are those who beat cops. There are those who conspired to attack, to bring weapons, to threaten to hang Mike Pence, who shot a gun, allegedly, toward the Capitol building. So to say everybody gets a pardon is particularly an interesting notion, considering there are so many degrees among the defendants.
And what do you find is typically the consequence for defendants who are defiant, who are not remorseful, who say something like this, oh, it doesn't matter because I'm going to get pardoned? Is there a penalty for that?
There's a factor at sentencing. How much remorse do you show? Do you show remorse for your crime? If you've pleaded guilty, are you remorseful? The Department of Justice will bring it up to the judge if they don't think you've been remorseful, if you've been defiant, if you continue to spin conspiracy theories or tout what happened January 6th. The judge will take that into consideration and potentially mete out a more strict punishment. So you can go from 6 months to 9 months or 6 years to 9 years. They can escalate a sentence based on how remorseful you are or how remorseful you aren't. I'll add this footnote. This episode in court yesterday was in front of a judge whose name may be familiar. It's Judge Tanya Chutkin, the same judge assigned to Trump's January 6th special counsel case.
Very interesting. I want to ask you about another story that you've been following while I have you here. You've also been looking at this new congressional report on aides who tell members that they feel unsafe. What can you tell us about that?
This got our attention when a source of ours said, you can't understand how many interns I talked to who told me they've gotten death threats this week just for answering the phone at their congressional offices. So we went to the Congressional Management Foundation, which surveys congressional aides and staff. They're in the business of watching out for the thousands of staffers who work at Capitol Hill. Their survey of about 140 top aides found 75% are worried about their safety or their boss's safety, about them receiving threats or being endangered in public spaces. Not just a few, nearly 75%. And the threats are becoming more frequent, they're becoming more visceral, they're potentially becoming more dangerous. There's that number. Nearly 75% think their member isn't safe and they have anxiety about it. It's causing turnover issues among congressional staff who are bailing on this walk of life because this may not be worth it. It's also causing members to have second thoughts about coming back here, but it's also escalating. And Nancy, that's the fundamental dynamic. This is becoming a more acute problem as our politics become more toxic and the rhetoric becomes more dangerous.
Really disturbing if the best and brightest don't want to work on Capitol Hill in any capacity. Right. Scott MacFarlane, congressional correspondent, thanks so much for your insight. Appreciate it. The defense rests without calling former President Donald Trump to the stand. We're going to wrap the last day of testimony in the historic case when we come back. For now, you're streaming America Decides. Witness testimony in Donald Trump's criminal hush money trial came to a close today after the defense rested its case. Trump's attorneys called only 2 witnesses to the stand after the prosecution rested its case yesterday. After today, the trial is adjourning until next Tuesday for a long holiday weekend. Robert Costa is outside the courthouse in New York City. Robert, good to see you. Trump had signaled that he was open to taking the stand in his own defense. So should we read anything into the fact that the defense team decided not to go there?
Good to be with you. The defense has decided to rest because former President Trump, while he has expressed a willingness to take the stand, is someone who doesn't see a lot of upside, sources tell me, to engaging in that high-wire act of testimony. He would have to testify under oath, and the prosecution in cross-examination would be open to ask him a whole array of questions that would delve into personal matters about his conduct over the past few decades. And that is an endeavor that the prosecution might want to see Trump be sitting there as a witness for, but the defense has concluded it's just not worth it at this time. And sources close to Trump's legal team also tell me they feel relatively good right now following the testimony of Michael Cohen. They believe his credibility has been challenged, and you can tell here it's sometimes a challenge to hear each other in Lower Manhattan. It's quite a scene.
Right, you've got sirens, you've got protesters, but we hear you loud and clear. Robert, you mentioned Michael Cohen. He was one of about 20 witnesses that the prosecution called over 2 weeks or so. Why did Trump's attorneys decide to call on just 2 witnesses to testify in his defense?
You saw in the choice of witnesses a real specificity from the Trump side about raising more doubts about Michael Cohen. Bob Costello is a longtime confidant of Rudy Giuliani. He's a member of the Trump orbit. And you see in the calling of Bob Costello an attempt by Trump's defense team to raise questions about Cohen's credibility. Bob Costello testified that he believes Michael Cohen never associated Trump with the hush money payments.
You know, I want to ask you about Bob Costello in particular. His testimony, as you noted, was aimed at discrediting Michael Cohen, who's really a central witness for the prosecution. Did Costello accomplish this? Because his testimony was tumultuous, to say the least.
Costello did raise questions about whether Cohen ever privately linked Trump to these hush money payments. He said that Cohen never mentioned Trump when it came to the hush money payments. At the same time, there might be a cost with having Costello testify, because I was watching the jury carefully inside the courthouse, and it's clear Costello was this seismic moment where he had this confrontation with Judge Juan Merchan, to the point where Merchan at one point dismissed the entire room and said, "I need to confront this witness." And he said to the witness, "Don't roll your eyes. Don't in any way start to sigh or mutter about what I'm saying." So for the defense, calling Costello, yes, it raised questions about Michael Cohen, but it also really created a rupture in the courtroom.
Yeah, it's interesting to watch what the jury ends up making of that. Speaking of the jury, the trial's adjourning until next Tuesday after Memorial Day. What's going to happen on Tuesday, and how could this long break, 4 or 5 days, impact the jurors?
You're going to see next week, after Memorial Day weekend, closing arguments, and that this is the final time where the lawyers can go before the jury and try to summarize their arguments and really make the case on the prosecution side that while there may be concerns about Michael Cohen, at the end of the day, he shows that Trump was implicated directly, in his view at least, in these hush money payments. And for the defense, they can continue to say Michael Cohen has stolen from the Trump organization. He's acknowledged that under oath. He can't be seen as a credible witness. And it's really a competition of perspectives on Michael Cohen, who remains the key witness in this case.
Robert Costa in a very busy Lower Manhattan. Thanks so much.
Thank you for your patience with all of this noise.
Yesterday, the former president of the United States, who praises dictators, who said there were very fine people on both sides in Charlottesville, let's not forget, took to social media and highlighted language from Nazi Germany.
That was Vice President Harris speaking out about a Trump Truth Social post. We're going to have more on that campaign video and the connection to Nazi Germany when we come back. You're streaming America Decides. President Biden is now responding to a deleted video posted to Donald Trump's social media account that includes references to a, quote, unified Reich. Take a listen.
A unified Reich? That's Hitler's language. That's not America's. He cares about holding on to power. I care about you.
At a campaign fundraiser, he said, quote, "This is Hitler's language, not America's." Weijia Jiang joins us now from the White House with more. Weijia, good to see you. A White House spokesman said that any post that glorifies Nazi language is, quote, abhorrent, sickening, and disgraceful. It seems that the Biden team is kind of taking this on from all angles.
Exactly, Nancy. In fact, we just heard from President Biden, who was asked about this earlier today, and he told reporters when asked for a response that it would take too long. But then the Biden campaign released this video that was filmed sometime this morning, we are told, reacting to this Trump Truth Social post. And the White House says they're not going to weigh in on anything that has to do with the 2024 campaign, but certainly had something to say about this post. As you mentioned, Andrew Bates, who is a senior spokesperson here at the White House, used those words, abhorrent. He also said that any anti-Semitic dog whistling is dangerous and offensive and profoundly un-American. So the White House is not accepting this as an accident. They are saying that this was very intentional language that the former president, I should say, chose to amplify. Nancy.
Right. And we should say that the Trump campaign did eventually take the video down, but not right away. They are blaming it on a junior staffer who they say did not see the print about a unified Reich before he or she posted it. But this isn't the first time that the Biden campaign and the president himself have expressed concerns about Trump's rhetoric. So how does this incident fit into the campaign's larger message about threats to democracy?
Well, the campaign issued a statement to say that this is yet another example of Donald Trump wanting to rule as a dictator over one group of people. And he talked, according to the campaign, has mentioned this several times, Nancy. They provided a list of incidents in which they say Trump used similar language, pointing to, as an example, the protests that we saw in Charlottesville, Virginia, where neo-Nazis marched. And, of course, we all remember Trump saying that there were fine people on both sides of that argument. He's talked about migrants in a way saying that they have poisoned the blood of America, which, of course, is echoing similar language that Hitler used in the past. And so the campaign says this is not an accident. This is not a one-off. This is a pattern of behavior that shows that Trump wants to rule this country in a certain way. And of course, they continue to remind people of what happened on January 6th and accuse the president of spearheading that entire effort.
Ouija, when it comes to the campaign, we're now in mid-May. It feels like the cadence of campaign travel is picking up for this president. He's been in several states over the past 7 days. What does his travel itinerary tell us about the strategy going forward?
Well, the White House would say that it's just President Biden being the president and that he often travels. But what we are noticing, Nancy, is that he does go on official trips as president, but then he attaches campaign events to those. As an example, today he's in New Hampshire talking about some of his policies, but he is hopping on a plane and going to Boston for 2 campaign events. And as you mentioned, this weekend he was in the critical swing states of Georgia and Michigan, both in his capacity as commander-in-chief, but as a candidate as well. And so we are also seeing that he is traveling a lot more and hitting those really important states, Nancy, that will likely determine the outcome of the election.
Part of the prerogative of being president, you can head to battleground states and call it an official visit. Ouija Zhang at the White House, thanks so much.
Sure.
Now we're going to bring in our reporter panel, Sabrina Rodriguez and Dave Weigel. Sabrina is a national political reporter for The Washington Post, and David is a politics reporter for Semaphore. Good to see both of you. Thanks for coming in. Dave, I want to start with you. I mean, you've been covering the Trump campaign for a long time. When it comes to this controversy over this video, how much of it has to do with anti-Semitism and how much of it has to do with a campaign that is just run in a somewhat haphazard manner? They don't necessarily have the processes and procedures that you might see on another campaign that would prevent a video like this from being uploaded in the first place.
Yeah, I did get deja vu when I saw this last night, because I remember writing in 2016 about Trump sharing images that had Stars of David places as if they were bigoted items. I've seen basically far-right figures create memes for Donald Trump that he shares. I covered this with Ron DeSantis' campaign. Because there are 2 things happening here. One is this supply issue, where there are a lot of far-right activists who make videos that make it up to Donald Trump without a filter. The other is, yes, the campaign's pretty well organized. The campaign is the RNC lock. It has raised more money than the Biden campaign in the last month. But it has a candidate who can't be disciplined that way, who can't stick to an answer on abortion, who can't stick to posting videos that don't harm his campaign. And I think that set it up very well. The Biden campaign wants people to think of the Trump years as chaotic and think of Trump as a risk if he's president again. So something like this, as minor as it is, to some people, as much as it was online for an hour, I see why they jumped on this. They want people to think of the chaotic Trump that they have never given a popular vote majority to, starting in 2016.
And yet, Sabrina, as David points out, for the first time ever last month, Donald Trump actually came out on top when it comes to fundraising.
Yes. I mean, the reality is we've seen that Biden and his campaign has a massive war chest. I mean, he, in the prior quarters, has outraised Trump. But I think one of the most notable parts of this is that this has happened, this fundraising and him overtaking Biden in this quarter, happened while Trump was on trial. And a lot of the messaging around it has been how much the trial is going to hurt Trump, or what impact is it going to have, if any. And I think seeing how much fundraising shows that that base of supporters that Trump really relies on, they're still with him even while he is going through this trial.
David, where are we with Veep stakes for the Trump campaign? Who has sort of fallen away at this point? Who still has a shot at being chosen by the former president?
Kristi Noem has fallen away. Every Republican agrees with that. Republicans I was talking to in the last week described this process that we all watched unfold in real time. But from their perspective, people who saw her in the top 3, the top 5 of Trump's picks, she's gone. She's not making a comeback. She can keep holding events, but it's not going to happen. The people around a couple of senators have they've been confident. They've remained confident. I think there are reasons you're seeing J.D. Vance on TV a lot defending Trump. That more than you did 2 months ago. There's because he is in the mix. Tim Scott is in the mix. But I think I've heard more in the last week about Vance than I have about any other senator. Marco Rubio, too. I mean, the Republicans who are going out of their way not just to defend him in court, but to appear in multiple media forums where they might get back to Trump, those are the ones to take seriously. And Vance is at the top of that pack right now.
And Tim Scott's talking a big game. He actually said the other day, well, if there is a vice presidential debate, maybe I'll see you there.
Yes, I mean, we're seeing it. The competition is ongoing, and I think from everything that has been reported on Trump and kind of the dealings behind the scenes, I mean, he's enjoying this. Right. You know, anyone in his circle and his orbit will tell you this isn't a decision that he's going to make until he has to make it, because in the meantime, he gets to see that competition playing out on the Sunday shows, in public, and his own trial, and seeing all these Republican leaders really coming out for him.
I want to ask you about Arizona, a state where recent polling has showed Biden trailing Trump, but also shows Ruben Gallego, Congressman Ruben Gallego, actually ahead of Kari Lake, which was not always the case. What's going on there?
Well, Gallego got the race very early. He scared Sinema out. A lot of things happened, but basically he got in the race when it wasn't clear it was going to be a two-way race. Now it is. He's had a message like Sinema used to run that is not really partisan, that is about helping veterans, that is about dealing with the border, although details to be negotiated. She has run a more partisan campaign. She's still associated. She's still, one thing you'll hear from Republicans about her is that she's still campaigning like a MAGA figure, not a Senate candidate. She is spending a lot of time not in Arizona. And are there a lot of voters paying attention to where their Senate candidate is in May of the election year? Maybe not. But Democrats make sure that is known, that Kari Lake is at Mar-a-Lago a lot more than she's shaking hands in Tucson. And Gallego's taking advantage of that.
She's not doing what a lot of Senate candidates do in a general election, which is move to the middle.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's really notable that we saw that the National Republican Senatorial Committee, they came out and said Arizona is not one of their top targets coming into this election. And I think it's from the campaign that we've seen Ruben Gallego building. I mean, it's a big focus on the independents who make a sizable chunk of voters. It's 1/3 of voters in Arizona. And those more moderate Republicans who have already seen Kari Lake. I mean, she's not an unknown figure. She ran a whole campaign in 2022. So they've heard her rhetoric. They've seen her tying herself so closely to former President Trump. And he's saying, you know, if you're that person that really is not a fan of Trump and really is turned off by what Kari Lake has been saying, the election denialism, her rhetoric in the past on abortion, he's that candidate. He's that person that wants to be like a Sinema, wants to be in sort of the era of John McCain as well.
Right, and Democrats have a pretty solid recent record in Arizona in the Senate when they move to the middle. I want to ask you about some recent polling that shows, surprise, surprise, that the economy is the biggest issue. You know, that's not a shocker, but there are other issues that have gotten so much attention lately, like the war in Gaza, that, you know, we can forget that actually this is what is primarily on the minds of voters. And you just went to Texas, and I'm wondering if that was the sense you got there as well, that, you know, at the end of the day, everything kind of else falls away and pales in comparison to the economy.
Yes, and it encompasses so much, because some of the problems in Texas are not the problems in swing states. There's a lot of worries about property insurance, which are not really the purview of the president, but things get assigned to the president. Things get assigned to, I felt more confident 4 years ago. I felt like my dollar stretched further 4 years ago. So I'm in places where people are paying even 60% as much they are for gas as California or other states, and they're still relatively unhappy about it. There are economic indicators that have moved the president's way. He has talked about them, and nothing has really moved the dial. I saw this in a place where Biden's not really going to be campaigning a lot, in East Texas, but I heard the same things there that I see in New Hampshire or in Minnesota or anywhere else.
Right. Always comes down to economy and inflation. Sabrina Rodriguez, Dave Weigel, thanks so much for coming in today.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks. Behind bars, but maybe not out of the loop. Peter Navarro shares more on a second Trump term, what the former aide is saying from his jail cell. You're streaming America Decides. Former White House aide to Donald Trump, Peter Navarro, is currently serving a 4-month sentence in Miami for a contempt of Congress conviction. But Navarro's time behind bars is not stopping him from sharing what he believes to be the former president's economic agenda if he's reelected. The former director of the White House National Trade Council predicts what a second term for Trump would look like in a new article published by Semafor. He wrote his responses out using the email system at the prison's law library. Clever. The author of this article joins us now, Semafor senior editor Gina Chon. Gina, thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so I want to hear what he said, but first I want to understand better the mechanics of how this even came about. Did you just send him a question at a time and he responded on the prison's computer system, or how did this come about?
Well, so he is 74, so he got actually a coveted job in the law library where it's air conditioned, it's Miami, it's hot, so he is indoors, and so he has regular access to the prison email system and was able to write out his questions. I had a lot of them, so that made a phone conversation maybe a little logistically difficult, so we decided to go that route. But he's actually visited fairly often by Trump's inner circle, including his eldest son, Don Jr. So at one point, we had actually contemplated him handwriting the responses and handing it to Don Jr. during one of his visits, but it ended up taking longer, so we went the email route.
That is fascinating. Now let's talk about what he actually said, because for starters, he said that within the first 100 days of a Donald Trump return to office, that the Fed chair, Jerome Powell, will be gone. Why does he claim that that's the case?
Well, the Fed chair, Powell, has been a target of Trump's from the first term. He had called him an enemy of the people because he was not cutting rates in the way that Trump had hoped he would. And so they've been sort of bashing the Fed and his leadership for quite some time. So now if he does win in November, I think Powell has a big target on his back to cut rates much more quickly. They haven't even started yet. They have talked about higher for longer because the fight against inflation has been more challenging. If you see Trump come in January, I think you'll see that pressure really come to bear.
Navarro also told you that Trump would quickly seal the border, begin mass deportations. No surprise. Trump has said that as well. But he also said that Trump would impose more tariffs, not just on Chinese goods, but on goods from around the world.
Yeah, and that's, again, a continuation of his first term. One of the first things Trump did was impose steel tariffs, not only on China, but on U.S. allies in Europe, in Asia, and Japan, and elsewhere. And so I think we'll see that playbook continue. But in this case, he and Biden are actually on the same page. You just saw Biden put a bunch of tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles and various other products. And now they're sort of trying to outdo each other, basically, on the trade war front.
You know, sometimes when Trump's associates, allies go to jail or are convicted, he kind of distances himself from them. But based on what you're saying, with Don Trump Jr. visiting him in jail, with other members of the Trump inner circle visiting him in jail, it sounds like he is still in the inner circle and he is speaking for Trump when he answers those questions.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's because the reason why he went to prison, it was for refusing to cooperate with the congressional probe into the January 6th riots at the Capitol. And because of that, he is seen as, you know, a loyal servant to the president. He took one for the team, essentially, by going to prison instead. And so he's actually hoping to speak at the Republican National Convention if he gets out in time. And the release date is right around that same period. So that could be a possibility.
Did he tell you what role he'd like to have in a second Trump term?
So that is one question I did ask that he chose not to answer. But I'm hoping that, you know, we kind of have this set up now that hopefully I can get him to answer some more. And that is definitely still on my list.
Interesting. Well, we'll watch for a repeat interview from jail. Gina Chon from Semafor, thanks so much for coming in. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And that does it for us today. We're going to be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report with John Dickerson starts right now. Have a good one.